In today's episode of Podcast Theory, we're going to take a look at an issue that is exclusive to my home state here in Missouri. There's a new measure on the upcoming ballot called Amendment 3 that is quickly becoming a source of controversy and confusion. Opponents say it is a manipulative tool for gerrymandering, while proponents say it restores accurate representation to our redistricting process. Thankfully, our benevolent overseers in Hollywood have weighed in with the queen of precincts herself, Katniss J-Law of District 12. Thank you. For the love of God, Jen, tell us, what should we think?
Two separate Missouri courts ruled that the politicians who put Amendment 3 on the ballot broke the law. We have to hold them accountable.
There's a lot of outside money pouring into this campaign. It's hard to tell who has the right of it. This past week, I combed over Senate Joint Resolution number 38 in excruciating detail to dissect not only how the current redistricting process works, but what changes are actually being proposed. Instead of providing you with yet another summary to add into the mix, we're going to go through the resolution, one section at a time, so you can see for yourself who is being honest. My name is Neil Gist. Welcome to Podcast Theory. Okay, so let's start with Article 3, Section 2. There are three sections in this amendment that are being modified. Section 2, Section 3, and Section 7. Okay, Section 2 is a quick one. This has to do with lobbyists and gifts that are afforded to our representatives and senators. So, Section A, there are no changes here. It forbids politicians from becoming lobbyists within a certain time. Section B, Subsection B, forbids the new language forbids politicians from accepting any gifts whatsoever. Currently, they are allowed gifts up to $5 in value. So by removing it, that's pretty great. It takes out the whole gray area of having to try and determine the value of a gift from a lobbyist. Better to go ahead and just remove that entirely. By the way, if I sound a little funny or out of breath, I am recovering from COVID right now. So thank you for your prayers, everyone out there, and please bear with me as I'm not quite over it yet. But okay, and the rest of it is mostly remains the same, except for subsection C defines some financial limits for the House and the Senate candidates. That has been modified by just $100, cleans up some of the language, and then removes a multiplier in there that was supposed to account for inflation, essentially, but better to remove that and keep it just a hard set of numbers that if our representatives want to go change, they can. Okay, so moving along to Section 3, Article 3, Section 3. This is where all the demographer stuff is defined. So subsection A, we remove that completely. We will also remove subsection B completely. And then we start with subsection C. It gets a little bit confusing because as we go through this, the current subsections are renamed or reordered with different letters and numbers. And so it's a little tricky. But okay, so current subsection C is proposed to be the new subsection A. And that changes the verbiage from apportioned to redistricted and defines the numbers of congressmen and their districts. Congressmen and women. Subsection C1 is now subsection B. Cleaned up the language a little bit and removed the 10-day timeline for starting districting prep work. Okay, C1A is now B1. That the language now requires that those districts be drawn nearly equal in proportion, one person, one vote. Okay, C1B is now B2, excuse me. Okay, that's been shortened to include language about federal compliance, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and ensures equal opportunity voting. The original contains paragraphs here for determining the arithmetic for districts based off of the past 3 years' elections. Federal elections, they look at the governor, the U.S. Senate, and the President of the United States. Includes language for attempting to ensure competitiveness. So this is one of the major problems with the current language is that it actively promotes competitiveness over localization. It takes, let's say we're in Morgan County here, we're going to go all the way up to Kansas City or to Columbia or maybe south to Springfield and redraw it in such a way that it scoops up a bunch of Democrats in one of those cities so that there's a more even portion of Republicans and Democrats in my district. The problem is that, well, you end up with these crazy shapes, which is where gerrymandering comes from, but it has nothing to do with local representation, right? I don't want to have somebody in Kansas City or in Springfield representing me. There's absolutely nothing wrong. Just because my county is predominantly Republican, there's nothing wrong with having a representative who's also like Republican. Like, why does competitiveness and even more of an even balance of Democrats and Republicans why is that paramount? It's actually anti-republic, right? With a republic, you want to have your representatives be from your area, to be the voice of the people of that particular area. To prioritize instead competitiveness is to throw out one of the fundamental tenets of republicanism. Okay. Subsection C1C is now B3, and that requires contiguity. There it is. Okay, and that includes definitions for compact shapes. Essentially, what we're trying to do is draw squares and polygons that make sense. There aren't these crazy amorphous-looking shapes that are also constrained to geographical borders and natural borders and political boundaries and that sort of thing. You want to try to do it per county, for example. Subsection C1E is now B5. Okay, paragraphs that define. Okay, so the arithmetic that was originally earlier on in the bill has now been moved to here, and it's been modified a little bit to include a wider range of margin for determining competitiveness. So there's still competitiveness that still is a factor here, but it's not the paramount one with the proposed amendment. That prevents gerrymandering. But again, that you want to do that within the context of your local representation and not some crazy shape. Another fallacy of this whole thing, pursuing a 50-50 split. So there's not a 50-50 split of political affiliations in the state. How are you going to do that? If 80% of Missouri is Republican, how are you going to draw districts that are 50-50 everywhere? You can't. It can't be done. It's a fallacy. Okay, subsection C2 is now subsection C. The old way defines the nomination parameters for reapportionment commissioners. Okay, the new way, we replace the reapportionment commissioner with the House Independent Bipartisan Citizens Commission. And then it goes on to define the nomination process. Okay, here's the problem. Under the current way as defined by the 2018 law, we have a nonpartisan commissioner who is single-handedly in charge of creating these districts. And they say nonpartisan, which is a fantasy. Okay, everyone is going to have their bias, their political positions. And the idea that we're going to magically find somebody who is just so super impartial that they're not going to have that bias reflected in the work that they do, that it's just a fiction. It's a fable. Another problem with the nonpartisan individual is that it's the state auditor who appoints candidates, nominees, and then eventually it makes its way through the House, and there's some collaboration in determining who it's going to be, but it's from a selection that is determined autonomously by the state auditor, which is currently Nicole Galloway, the Democrat running for governor. Like, you really think she's going to have some nominee and be like, you know what, I don't think you have enough Republican representation in mind here. I'm going to find someone else. Of course not. Of course not. It's naive to think so. Subsection C3 has been reordered to subsection D, defines when the first meeting takes place and appointing roles for chairman, vice chair, secretary, etc. We also have a bunch of new subsections following this. Following the new D, here is now E, which gives 5 months to submit to the Secretary of State a plan from the new commission. Subsection F, 6 months to submit the final plan, which must pass an internal vote of 7/10 internally from the commission. Subsection G, if the deadline is not met, authority to complete falls to the Missouri Supreme Court. Subsection H defines compensation for commission members during session. Subsection I explicitly shields the redistricting plan from from future referendums. And J defines terms for legal disputes if there are violations or alleged violations in the districting rules. Okay, after that is Article 3, Section 7, which is essentially the same thing, but instead of it applying to the House, it applies to the Senate. The House Independent Bipartisan Citizens Commission is what it creates. So why do people have a problem with this? Clean Missouri, that's one of the major institutions that is campaigned hard for Amendment 1 whenever it came into fruition in 2018. And now they're campaigning hard against Amendment 3, which seeks to change a bunch of it. So what are they saying? So I took some of the arguments directly from Clean Missouri's website. They've got their main concerns laid out right there. So I want to go through one by one and address those. Their first one says Amendment 3 is written to trick you. It changes lobbyist gift limits by only $5 and contribution limits by just $100. Okay, so here's the problem with this. It is a little subversive, okay? Because most of the issues surrounding this joint resolution concern the demographer, and it spends a lot of time focusing in the ballot definition on the lobbyist gifts, and it does only change it by $5. But it's not just changing it by $5; it's forbidding it entirely. Forbidding gifts from lobbyists. All right. And so there's a little more significance to it than there. But two, it's like, look, if you really have a problem with that, if you think it's manipulative or distracting, they're tricking you, understand that in 2018, that is exactly what the ballot was. There were 6 bullet points laid out, I believe, in the original language. And all of those were focusing on the lobbyists. For the most part, there was only one bullet point that had anything to do with the demography. I mean, why were you were cool with it then and now you're not cool with it? So, there's no inconsistency here. It's just grasping at arguments. Amendment 3 reverses voter-approved redistricting reforms to let lobbyists and political operatives draw incumbent protection maps. Okay, this is also ridiculous. So for several reasons. The first argument they're saying here is the voters approved the previous amendment. So does that mean you're implying then that voters aren't allowed to vote on anything else if it changes anything in the Constitution or changes the law? The whole purpose of having a legal framework is so that we can have laws that evolve over time. So just because people voted for it in 2018 doesn't mean that they're not allowed to vote for it to change it. We should encourage fixing broken laws. Oh, the second contention they're making here is that the redistricting reforms let lobbyists and political operatives draw. This is so ridiculous. So first of all, we have the new way would be with a bipartisan commission. And so everybody is going to have equal say in how this thing turns out. Both major parties will have an equal opportunity. Whereas under the current way, we're leaving it to the state auditor's appointee. How is that not suspect, like going to be suspect or liable for political? That is a political operative, that person. There's a serious shortage of checks and balances. So the thing that they're afraid of is what we have right now. So strange argument to make. The next one, Amendment 3 says that even if their politician protection maps are unconstitutional, a judge can't throw them out. No one, especially politicians, should be above the law. Okay, so they're talking about subsection I and J. But if you read the subsections, all it really is a severability clause. Okay, if it's saying that if there's a problem with this particular district, we're not going to throw out the entire map, the baby with the bathwater here. Okay, we're going to address where the problem is and fix those areas that have fallen outside of the scope of the law or the Constitution. That's a reasonable thing to do. I don't see that as a politician protection plan. Okay, especially if you read how the terms for how these drawings ought to be. I'm a software engineer. I'm pretty good with complex data and math and shapes and that sort of stuff. Okay, it's going to take a significant amount of collaboration to do it, to create these districts according to the parameters that were poorly articulated. There will be mistakes. We know that there will be mistakes. So instead of trying to make criminals out of people who mess it up, let's just fix the mistakes. Seems reasonable to me. Another argument against this. 2 separate courts ruled that politicians broke the law with false claims about what's in the print of Amendment 3. When politicians' lies are so bad they break the law, we have to hold them accountable by voting no. That's what Katniss there said, right? Which, okay, so I looked up the older language and compared it to the newer language. The old language was completely true. It was totally honest. It just, the way that it was written, it could have been implied that there were changes being made, which weren't, because those changes, they weren't changes, they already existed. I want to read to you the paragraph that had to change. Here's the original way. Create citizen-led, independent, bipartisan commissions to draw state legislative districts based on one person, one vote, minority voter protection, compactness, competitiveness, fairness, and other criteria. That's all true. That's all completely true. The problem, the issues that they took with it were that some of those points were already or are already in the existing language. And so to put it in like that implies that it's a change, that they would be voting in favor of it when it already exists. And so the new language is probably a little bit better. The bias is still all over it, but the bias of these judges. The new languages changed the redistricting process voters approved in 2018 by transferring responsibility for drawing state legislative districts from the nonpartisan state demographer, nonpartisan, to governor-appointed bipartisan commissions, modifying and reordering the redistricting criteria. Okay, also true. It just took out all the fluff that was probably not necessary. Okay, one of the main issues as far as things being illegal or unconstitutional, there are several ways to get an amendment here in Missouri, and one of those is what we're doing now. After something goes through the House and the Capitol, then it makes its way onto the ballot where the citizens can democratically confirm it or reject it, a constitutional amendment. It's sort of an extra layer on top of the republic procedural elements. So I like that as an extra check and balance. However, there's another way to get an amendment on a proposed amendment onto the ballot, and that can be done by circumventing the people's representatives entirely through a petition process where if enough signatures are garnered, you can have an amendment proposed on the ballot without needing Congress or the Senate. And that's democracy, which is horribly dangerous. Our founding fathers had good reasons to fear democracy and instead created a republic. You don't want to put people in a situation where they can vote on something that they believe directly benefits them without any regard whatsoever to the systemic consequences of those benefits. For example, what if there's something if there's something proposed that just says everyone gets $1,000, well, who's going to vote yes on that? Probably everyone who wants $1,000. But where's the money going to come from? It's an important mystery. Okay, the last contention that I see is the amendment is designed to protect incumbent politicians. Yes and no. It's designed to protect incumbent Republican and Democrat politicians. This whole setup is designed for 2 parties and only 2 parties. There's 0 third-party representation. Okay, it's deliberately done this way so that to the benefit of both parties. So in that sense, it protects incumbent politicians. But otherwise, if you really want to protect your government against incumbent politicians, you have term limits, which we do. So if you oppose gerrymandering, if you want our districts to actually represent us geographically, if you want your representative to be from your local area, then vote yes on Amendment 3, and let's be done with this nonpartisan commissioner or nonpartisan demographer who acts autonomously, and instead restore a bipartisan commission where we can democratically establish our districts based off of input from both parties. Thank you again for tuning in tonight. My name is Neil Gist. This is Podcast Theory. Good night. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Just $1 a month, $5 a month, anything like that goes a long way in helping us ensure that we have the resources we need to continue to provide free videos for you. And we'd like to do more and more. And so your help really goes a long way in allowing that to happen. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the bell icon to receive notifications, and share on social media and all that good stuff. But yeah, we'll see you next week. Thanks.